May 1945 in Germany, a POW camp near the Rhine River. Shortly after World War II, the war in Europe is officially over. The German forces have surrendered, and the world breathes a collective sigh of relief. But for the women, the German POWs who had been part of the brutal Nazi war machine, the end of the war brings a new chapter, one filled with fear and uncertainty. They are about to face the Allies, and with it, their fate. In a small, hastily established POW camp near the Rhine River, a group of young German women are lined up in front of the American soldiers. Most of them have not eaten a proper meal in weeks. Their bodies are frail from the hunger they've endured during the last stages of the war. The conditions in the camp have been harsh, but as they stand there, hands shaking, they are filled with dread. They've heard the stories. They've heard the rumors. What will they do to us? One of the women, Maria, whispers to her friend Helga, standing beside her. We were soldiers in the war. They'll treat us as enemies. They'll starve us, too, or worse. They'll take revenge on us for what we did. Helga nods, her face pale with fear. Both women are exhausted, their bodies thin, their faces gaunt. The German soldiers have been defeated, but the women know the Allies are still angry, still full of hatred. They were part of a machine that caused so much death and destruction, and now they face the consequences. As they're led toward the American soldiers, they brace themselves for whatever comes next. They expect the worst. But what happens next will change everything. The American soldiers, young men in their 20s, look back at them with confusion. They've been given orders to provide food to the German prisoners, but they're not sure how to do it. What's the best way to feed a group of women who have been starved for so long? What's the right approach? How do you give food to women who have been part of the Nazi forces? One soldier, Sergeant John Mitchell, looks at the small, emaciated women before him. His hand hovers over a plate of food, unsure of how to proceed. Take it slowly, he says quietly, his voice steady but filled with empathy. If you enjoy listening to documentaries and war history, please subscribe to the channel and hit the like button. Also turn on your notification bell so you don't miss out on any new post. We don't want to overwhelm you. The women stare at the food, their eyes wide with disbelief. It's not the cruel treatment they feared. It's not the punishment they expected. It's kind. It's humanity. But can they trust it? Can they trust the hands that feed them, the hands of the enemy? The tension in the air is palpable. Maria hesitates, her fingers hovering above the plate, her body stiff with caution. The fear in her chest tightens, a knot that refuses to unravel. Every instinct screams at her to push the plate away, to refuse the kindness offered by the American soldiers, who are no longer just strangers. They're the very men who had fought against everything she had known. Could this be an act of revenge disguised as a gesture of charity? Could the food be poisoned? Or worse, could this be the beginning of something even more sinister? But then she sees Helga, her friend, slowly picking up her own plate. Helga's eyes meet hers, a silent understanding passing between them. Both women are uncertain, but they're hungry, too hungry to ignore the rumbles in their stomachs any longer. And in the back of Maria's mind, a thought begins to take root. Perhaps this moment is more than just about food. Maybe it's about something much bigger. Humanity. The war is over, but its effects have lingered long enough to make them question the very nature of human compassion. Slowly, Maria brings a plate to her chest, cradling it almost reverently. It's not just the food, it's the gesture, the recognition that, despite their status as enemies, these Americans see them as human beings. The long months of starvation and deprivation have not broken them yet. Their spirits, though battered, are still intact. The food may be simple, but it represents so much more. Sergeant Mitchell stands at a distance, watching carefully, his eyes taking in the hesitation of the women. He knows that offering food is not as simple as it might seem. This is not just about nutrition. It's about trust. The women before him have been conditioned by war to expect the worst, to believe that their enemies will not show kindness. But in his eyes, they are no longer the enemy. They are survivors, just like him. Take it slowly, Mitchell repeats softly, a quiet command wrapped in empathy. He's seen the toll the war has taken on everyone, soldiers and civilians alike. He understands that this moment is about more than just eating. It's about restoring dignity, about showing these women that the war they fought has ended, that the fear and hatred can end too. As Maria takes her first bite, she closes her eyes for a brief moment, overwhelmed by the simplicity of the act. The food is warm, nourishing, and yet it's the kindness that fills her most. The taste, however simple, feels like an entire meal in itself. It is a taste of survival, a taste of hope, a taste of a world that isn't as cruel as the one she had known in the last months of the war. Helga, watching Maria, takes her first bite as well. She chews slowly, her face softening as the warmth of food spreads through her. She had feared this moment, the moment where they would finally face their captors. And yet here she is, being fed, being cared for, and all the fear and uncertainty seem to melt away, if only for a moment. The women around them, too, begin to eat, each of them cautiously at first, but the steady rhythm of consumption soon breaks down the walls of suspicion. There is no poison. There is no hidden danger. There is only sustenance. There is only kindness. For the first time in a long time, they feel like humans again, not soldiers or prisoners, but women whose basic needs have been met. And with every bite they take, the walls around their hearts begin to crumble. The bitterness of war, the division between them and the Americans, begins to fade. It's still there, lingering in the background, but for the first time, the hope for reconciliation begins to emerge. They may have been enemies just days ago, but here, now, there's no room for hatred, only a simple exchange of food given by hand, to soothe the hunger they've all endured. The silence that follows is not uncomfortable, but reflective. The American soldiers stand watch, letting the women eat in peace. For the first time, they feel the weight of what they've accomplished not just by defeating the enemy on the battlefield, but by offering the most basic of human comforts to those they once considered their foes. Maria finishes her meal slowly, savoring every bite. As she looks up at Sergeant Mitchell, she meets his gaze, a silent exchange passing between them. In his eyes, she sees the same exhaustion, the same weariness that she feels in her own soul. They are both survivors of a war that has taken far too much from them. And at this moment, they are not enemies. They are simply two people, caught in the aftermath of a conflict that has cost them everything. The evening air is growing colder as the camp settles into an unusual quiet. The once nerve-wracking sounds of soldiers marching and orders being barked are now replaced with the soft rustling of wind against the camp's fencing. Maria sits beside Helga and a few other women, still processing the meal they've just had. There's a strange calmness now, one that they hadn't known since being taken prisoner. The food had been a catalyst for something bigger, something that began to quietly shift within them. But the more Maria reflects on the situation, the more she realizes it's not just about the food. Do you think they'll come back tomorrow? Feed us again? Helga asks, the question one of hope mixed with lingering fear. The experience had been so surreal. It was hard to imagine it being anything more than a fleeting moment. They'd been fed today, but in a war-torn world, would there really be any room for compassion in the days to come? Maria slowly shakes her head, a faint smile tugging at the corners of her lips. I don't know, Helga, but I think at this moment, today, this is something different. We've survived the worst, but maybe now it's time to start healing. I don't think they're just feeding us because they have to. I think they see us. They see us as human beings again. Her words hang in the air, and for the first time in a long while, Maria feels a sense of release, as if the weight of the war is starting to lift. They had all feared the worst, the cruelty, the vengeance, the anger that had brewed between nations. And yet, here they are, sitting side by side with their former enemies, sharing not just food, but a rare moment of kindness. One of the older women in the camp, Margaret, who had been silent for most of the day, finally speaks up. Her voice is soft, but there's a depth to it. You're right, Maria. It's been a long time since anyone cared enough to give us something so simple, something that felt like it came from the heart. These men, they've seen the same horrors we have. Maybe they understand that now. Margaret's words are like a spark, igniting a conversation among the women that flows freely and naturally. They begin talking not just about their experiences as prisoners, but about what they had before the war, their families, their homes, their lives before it all came crashing down. They share memories of summer spent in the countryside, of festivals and holidays with loved ones, of dreams that were put on hold, now feeling like distant echoes. And with every word, every shared story, the walls of fear begin to crumble. These women, who had once been part of the Nazi war machine, now find themselves part of a different story. A story of survival, of humanity, and of the hope that even in the darkest of times, there is the possibility of light. The American soldiers, too, begin to notice a change. Sergeant Mitchell, who had stood at the edge of the camp watching the women eat, now finds himself walking among them more frequently. He listens to their stories, not as a soldier but as a human. He hears about their struggles, their fears, and their desires for a world without war. In return, he shares his own story. The long, brutal days spent on the front lines, the losses he's witnessed, the destruction he's seen. Over the next few days, Sergeant Mitchell and his fellow soldiers begin to interact more with the women. Cautiously at first, then with a growing sense of understanding. The initial awkwardness between the two sides begins to fade as they realize they are no longer enemies. The war has ended, and in its place, there is the opportunity for something new: peace. Mitchell's actions speak louder than any words could. He doesn't just hand out food anymore. He takes the time to listen, to speak, and to learn about the women he had once considered enemies. With every conversation, every shared moment of humanity, the animosity that had once defined their relationship dissolves. The soldiers are no longer the liberators, and the women the prisoners. They are simply two groups of people, struggling to rebuild what was lost during the war. For the women, this shift is profound. They have been raised in a world where fear and hatred were common currencies. The concept of kindness from an enemy was alien to them. But now, as they look around at the soldiers who once represented everything they feared, they see something else. They see the possibility of healing, of starting anew. The days turn into weeks, and with each passing day, the transformation within the POW camp becomes more evident. What had once been a tense, hostile environment filled with fear and suspicion is now slowly becoming a place of tentative camaraderie. Maria and her fellow POW women continue to interact with the American soldiers, and as they do, they learn that not all enemies are created equal. Some soldiers, like Sergeant Mitchell, have shown them that the true enemy isn't always the person standing in front of you. It's the ideologies, the hatred, and the circumstances that have shaped the conflict. The meals continue to be shared, simple but nourishing, and slowly, the women begin to trust the Americans. They no longer see their captors as soldiers on the other side of a war. Instead, they see them as people who had fought just like they had and who, despite being on opposite sides, were now sharing the experience of rebuilding a shattered world. One evening, as the sun begins to set and the sky turns to rich orange, Maria sits outside near the barracks, staring off into the distance. The camp is quiet, save for the occasional sound of soldiers walking by and the rustle of leaves in the wind. She's alone, lost in thought, when Sergeant Mitchell walks over, a cigarette dangling loosely between his fingers. "Do you mind if I join you?" he asks, his voice casual, but with a hint of uncertainty. He's used to standing at attention, giving orders, but here, away from the front lines, it's different. There's no structure, no hierarchy in this moment, just two people in a quiet world. Maria looks up at him, surprised at first, but then she nods. "No, I don't mind," she says softly, her voice tinged with the same hesitation she felt when they first spoke. But now it feels easier. It feels natural. Sergeant Mitchell sits beside her, and they both look out over the camp. For a long while, neither speaks. The weight of the past few weeks, the uncertainty of what lies ahead, lingers between them, but the silence is no longer uncomfortable. It's a silence that's been earned through shared experience, through the quiet understanding that they are no longer enemies, but two people in a broken world, both trying to make sense of what comes next. "I've been thinking," Mitchell says after a while, his voice quieter now, "about what you said before, about how we're all changed by this war." He exhales a puff of smoke and looks at Maria. "We've all lost something, haven't we? Even the soldiers. Even the ones who fought on the other side." Maria nods slowly, her eyes still on the horizon. "Yes," she agrees, her voice distant. "I don't know how to explain it, but I feel different. Even when the war was over, I didn't feel free. I didn't feel like it was okay to move on. But now, after everything, I don't know. Maybe it's time. Maybe it's time to heal. Mitchell turns toward her, his gaze thoughtful. He knows the women in this camp have endured unspeakable horrors, both from the war and from years of fighting for survival. And yet, here they are, finding some semblance of peace amidst the wreckage. Maybe it's time for all of us, he says quietly. I don't think anyone walks away from this unchanged. But maybe we can find a way to rebuild, not just the world, but ourselves. Maria turns her head, looking at him for the first time with less wariness in her eyes. How do you do that? She asks, her voice vulnerable. How do you rebuild after everything? After all the things we've done? After everything we've lost? Mitchell looks at her, his expression soft. I don't know. I wish I had the answers. But I think it starts with small things. With moments like this, sharing a meal, talking with each other, not as enemies, but as humans. I think if we can do that, we've already started rebuilding. There's a long pause as Maria processes his words. She thinks back to the last few days, the small moments of connection with the American soldiers, the way their kindness has chipped away at the walls built by years of war. For the first time in a long time, she feels something she thought she had lost. Hope. We can rebuild, she whispers, more to herself than to him. It's not too late. Mitchell smiles, his eyes crinkling at the corners. No, Maria, it's never too late. As the sun dips below the horizon, casting long shadows over the camp, Maria feels a sense of peace settle in her chest. The world is still broken, the scars of war still visible, but in this moment, she feels a quiet strength rising within her, a strength that comes from not just surviving, but from understanding, from realizing that, even in the darkest of times, there's a potential for light, for growth, and for healing. The food they were given by the Americans wasn't just nourishment for the body, it was nourishment for the soul. And in that simple exchange, something powerful had begun. A bridge had been built not just between nations, but between people, between enemies who have been torn apart by war. And in that moment, both Maria and Sergeant Mitchell know that they have taken the first step toward rebuilding a world that has lost its way, a world where even the smallest act of kindness can heal the deepest wounds. Days blend together, turning into weeks, and with every sunrise, the camp becomes less of a place of confinement and more of a quiet refuge. It's still a POW camp, but something has shifted. The tension that once filled the air with unease and suspicion has dissipated. Now, there's a new rhythm to the camp, one based on shared understanding. The daily meals, once laden with distrust, have become a symbol of the new reality, taking root of reality, where the enemy no longer exists in the same way, where even the victims of war, the survivors, can find solace in one another. Maria, having spent so many days lost in fear and uncertainty, now finds herself walking around the camp with a sense of quiet reflection. The night sky seems less oppressive now. She finds herself talking more with the other women, sharing stories not just of the war, but of the lives they had before it. There is a sense of healing in those conversations, a sense of returning to who they were before the war stripped them of their identity, their peace, their dignity. As the days go by, Sergeant Mitchell and the other American soldiers continue their interactions with the POW women. It isn't just about food anymore. The guards, too, have softened their stances. While they remain vigilant, their roles in the camp no longer feel like a constant threat. Instead, the soldiers are becoming part of the shared landscape of the women's lives. They start to sit with them in the evenings, talk with them during their breaks, and share small, fleeting moments of humanity that the war had tried to bury. One afternoon, Sergeant Mitchell comes across Maria again, this time near the camp's edge. She is sitting on the ground, her legs crossed, a book open in her lap. He had seen her reading before, but today she is looking at the book with a pensive expression. "Something on your mind?" he asks as he approaches, his tone light but genuine. Maria looks up, a slight smile forming on her lips. "Just thinking," she says, her voice softer than usual. "About what happens next. I can't stay here forever, you know?" Mitchell nods, sitting beside her on the ground. "No, I don't think any of us will. But even after everything, I think the hardest part is going to be figuring out how to move forward. Maria closes the book and places it beside her, looking out over the camp. Sometimes I wonder if there's anything left to go back to, she says quietly. When I think about home, I can't even picture it anymore. It feels like a different life. Mitchell watches her for a long moment, understanding the weight of her words. He, too, has thought about what comes after the war. He's seen too many men return home, only to be haunted by the things they've done, the things they witnessed. The physical battles may have ended, but the internal battles continue. You might not feel like it now, but there's always something left. A new start, if you want it. Mitchell says after a pause, I know the war doesn't just go away, but maybe it's not about going back to what was. Maybe it's about moving forward to something new, a new version of the life you lost. Maria considers his words, looking at the horizon as if searching for a glimpse of that new life. I'd like that, she admits. I don't know how it will happen, but maybe there's a way. Maybe we don't have to carry all of this forever. Mitchell nods, his expression serious. You won't carry it alone, he says, his voice steady. None of you will. It's a small promise, but it means the world in that moment. The soldiers may be leaving soon. The POW camp will eventually close, and the women will be freed. But the change isn't just about their physical release. It's about the emotional weight of the war being lifted, bit by bit, through acts of kindness, understanding, and shared humanity. As the camp starts to settle into a quieter routine, there are fewer moments of hesitation, fewer moments of fear. The women begin to speak more freely, not just to the American soldiers, but to one another. The friendships that have blossomed over shared meals and quiet conversations become the bedrock for what comes next. They talk about rebuilding their lives, about finding a way to heal the wounds of war. They share hopes for the future, no longer bound by the fear of the past. The American soldiers, too, feel the weight of the transformation. Sergeant Mitchell, though he never imagined he would be sitting side by side with the women he once saw as enemies, feels a deep sense of respect for them. They have endured more than he ever could have imagined. They have shown resilience that even the strongest of soldiers would have admired. The war is over, but for those who fought it, both soldiers and civilians, healing takes time. It doesn't happen with the signing of peace treaties or the closing of battlefronts. It happens in small, human moments, in a soldier offering food, in a conversation shared over a quiet evening, in the simple gesture of kindness that transcends years of hatred and suffering. As the camp eventually empties, as the women are sent to new locations, and the American soldiers begin their return home, they carry with them a memory of what they have shared the moment when two sides, once divided by war, found a way to come together. The legacy of those who were once enemies, now united in the shared experience of survival, compassion, and hope, will continue long after the war's end. The war's end didn't mean the end of suffering for Maria or her fellow POWs. As they are slowly released from the confines of the camp and allowed to rejoin their families, the emotional scars of the war are far from gone. The lives they had known before the war, the lives they dreamed of returning to, are gone. In their place are ruins, not just the cities and homes, but the pieces of themselves they once were. But for the first time, there is a glimmer of hope. Maria returns to a shattered Germany. Her home is in ruins, her family torn apart by the war. Yet, as she walks through the wreckage of her childhood home, she feels the echoes of something different, something that has taken root deep within her, something planted by the small act of kindness she had witnessed in the camp. It wasn't just the food that had nourished her. It was the understanding that, despite everything, humanity still existed. Her first weeks back were difficult. Rebuilding a life is never easy, especially after the devastation of war. But Maria, through quiet moments of reflection, remembers the conversation she had with the soldiers, the kindness they had shown her, the acknowledgement of their shared suffering, and the realization that they were all, in the end, just people trying to survive. Maria reaches out to her family, carefully rebuilding relationships strained by the war. She talks to her father about his experiences on the front lines and her mother about the pain of losing their home. But the conversation doesn't revolve around blame or resentment. It revolves around healing, about acknowledging that everyone, no matter what side they fought on, has scars. Sergeant Mitchell, back in the United States, feels the weight of the war long after the fighting ends. He returns home, but the memories of those weeks at the POW camp never leave him. The faces of the women, their quiet strength, their willingness to trust, despite the horrors they had endured, haunt him. He goes on with his life, but he continues to remember the small moments of connection, the way the act of sharing food had transcended enemy lines, creating a new bond that neither side had expected. Years later, when Mitchell attends a reunion of veterans, he finds himself speaking about his time in Germany. He talks about the POW women, about Maria, Helga, and the others, and how they had taught him that, in the end, it wasn't the weaponry or the battlefield victories that mattered most. It was the ability to heal, to forgive, and to move forward together. The story of the camp near the Rhine becomes part of Mitchell's life, something he shares with his fellow veterans. They, too, remember the war not just as soldiers, but as men who had encountered the same kind of humanity they had fought against. And when they speak of their service, they remember the faces of the women they had once feared, and how, in the end, they were all just people trying to find their way out of the wreckage of war. Back in Germany, the women, too, remember Maria, now older and with a family of her own, still tells the story of the kindness she received in the aftermath of the war. When she shares it with her children and grandchildren, she speaks not of the war itself, but of the possibility of healing and forgiveness. The lesson she passed down wasn't one of bitterness or anger. It was one of understanding, of showing compassion to those who were once considered the enemy. As the years pass, Maria finds herself involved in the rebuilding of her community. She becomes a teacher, helping to shape the next generation in a world that must learn from the past. She teaches her students about the importance of compassion, of understanding, and of how, in the darkest times, the smallest act of kindness can be the catalyst for peace. The story of the camp near the Rhine, of the women who had been prisoners of war and the American soldiers who had fed them, becomes more than just a memory. It becomes a symbol of hope for the future. It's a story shared by both sides of the conflict, of how, in the wake of devastation, there's always room for the possibility of humanity, of rebuilding, of moving forward. Sergeant Mitchell, too, carries the lessons from those days with him. His story of the POW women, of the trust they place in him and his comrades, stays with him long after the war ends. He becomes a counselor for other veterans, helping them work through their own trauma. When he talks about the women in the camp, he shares the lessons of compassion and rebuilding that they had shown him. He passes those lessons on to future generations, reminding them that no matter the scars left by war, it's the ability to show kindness that can heal even the deepest wounds. And as time moves forward, the story of the camp near the Rhine continues to resonate, a powerful reminder that, even in the aftermath of war, there is always room for humanity, for compassion, and for the chance to rebuild. If you enjoy listening to documentaries and war history, please subscribe to the channel and hit the like button. Also turn on your notification bell so you don't miss out on any new post.